In this lesson, we're going to take a look at how to create materials for Unreal Engine 4. Alright, so in the last lesson we had learned the process of importing custom assets into the engine, and we brought in this crate mesh. Now with this, I want to also create a material for that. And so in order to do that, let's go ahead and click on our DT Materials folder, which I've already created for you. Here, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and create a new asset, and we want to create a material. Give it a name. In this case, I'm going to call it M underscore. M, for me, stands for material, and this is a naming convention that I like to use. So you'll see with like my props, you'll see a prefix of SM, meaning static mesh. If it's a skeletal mesh, like a character, you might see SKM. Okay. That's my own naming convention. You can use whatever you like. There are several out there. Now, after this, I give it the name of the material, what that should be. So in this case, we're going to call this painted wood. Okay, and then we're going to hit enter. Now, once you've hit enter and you've renamed that, you can double click on that material, and that will bring it up in the material editor. I'm going to go ahead and dock that right up here, so that way we can switch back and forth very quickly. So under our painted wood, you'll notice that we have these material properties. We have things like base color, metallic, specular, roughness, emissive color. Most of these will look pretty familiar if you have experienced Unreal Engine 3. Now in Unreal Engine 4, it's important to note that the materials have changed a little bit. We're using more of a physically based rendering approach to materials. So instead of having diffuse, it's now called base color. And then we have metallic, we have specular. Specular is a little bit different than what it used to be, but you'll get the idea here. So let's go ahead and bring in our textures to get started. So I want to bring in a wood plank texture. So to do this, we'll simply go into our content browser. We'll need to go to the level editor first. Here's our content browser. And then I can go to my textures folder, so DT textures. And let's go ahead and find our wood texture. And it's going to be pretty close to the bottom. Okay, and it's called wood diffuse. Now, again, that could be a little confusing, but that's just that's a habit for me, is calling my textures diffuse and spec and things like that. So I apologize if that's a little confusing. But let's go ahead and select this wood texture, and then we're going to go back to our material. Now, if we go ahead and right click, we can bring up this menu that will allow me to add nodes to my material editor workspace. Now nodes are going to hold information. They can hold texture information, color information, numerical information, lots of different things, even vector information. So at this point, we need to figure out how do we get a texture, just an image, into the material editor. We could do this by looking through some of the groups that we have. And you can see here that we have texture and we have texturing. Let's go ahead and open up texture and let's see what we get here. You can see that we have a list of different nodes that we could possibly use. For this case, we're going to be using texture sample. Texture sample is one of the most commonly used nodes in Unreal Engine 4. If you take a look at your palette here on the right side, you can see all of the different nodes that you have available. And if you scroll all the way down to texture, you'll find that we have the texture sample. But notice off here to the right, it actually has a keyboard shortcut. And this lets us know that this is a very common node. So if I hold down the T key and then I left click inside of my workspace, or the grid here, you'll see that a texture sample has been dropped in with the texture that I had selected. Okay. Now let's go ahead and select it. And you can see this yellow border around that. You can hit delete, and that will remove that from the grid. Now let's left click on our texture sample, and you'll notice that with this node we have a preview and then we have these output nodes that we can access. The output nodes, we have the texture output. This is going to be your RGBA output. So this will output the red, green, and blue channels as well as your alpha. So this will just go ahead and take what you see here in the preview and it will output that. Now we can also access the red, green, and blue channels of this image and isolate information that way. So what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and plug this into my base color. Notice what happens to my material. I can now see that texture on my material, and that can now be applied to our crate mesh. Now I want to push things a little bit further than this. I don't want to just create a wood texture and be done. We called this a painted wood material. And so what I want to do now is I want to bring in another texture, and I want to layer it on top of this one. So with this material editor, we have the capabilities of layering multiple materials, or excuse me, multiple textures on top of one another to create an entirely different look. So to do this, let's go back to our content browser and let's go to this wood mask object here. And this wood mask can serve as a great texture that will allow us to separate out the white areas as paint and the black areas as wood. So with that selected, let's go into our painted wood, and we're going to hold down the T key, left click, and that will bring in our texture sample with that currently selected texture from our content browser. Now with this, what we want to do is we want to mix it with this material as well. So to do this, we're going to use a node or a mathematical node to bring those together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a node called LERP, or linear interpolation. This can be done by holding down the L key and then left clicking, and that will bring in a LERP. You could also find it by right clicking and going to Math, and then inside of this you'll find linear interpolate. Okay, that will be the exact same thing. Go ahead and delete that second one there. And now we want to mix these together. All we have to do is plug in their RGB value into either A or B. Okay, and so we're going to take this one. We're going to plug this into. Let's plug this into A, and then we're going to plug this one into B. Now I want to be able to see what my result is before I plug it into my base color. To do this, we can simply click on this expand button, and this will show us a preview of what that looks like. Now looking at this, it looks pretty good. It's not bad. We can see the wood underneath, but it's not giving me the exact result that I want. Let's see what happens if we switch the values. So let's plug this into B, and let's plug this into A. Does that give us a different value? Nope, it's pretty much the same. Now I want to be able to control the white values on that. So how do I do that? Well, this can be done by mixing another node, and this is going to be a vector node. Okay, and this is going to allow us to have color. So a vector 3. So if I hold down 3 on the keyboard and I left click, this will bring in what's called a vector 3 node. If you double click on it, it's going to bring up a color picker, and I can choose any color that I want. In this case, I'm going to choose white and hit OK. Then what we can do is we can bring both of these colors together and then feed those into the LERP here. So to multiply these together, we'll use a multiply node. This can be done by holding down M on the keyboard and left clicking, and there's a multiply node. Let's go ahead and take this, plug that into A, and take this and plug that into B. Then we'll take our output from our multiply here and we'll plug that into B on our LERP. Now notice that the end result hasn't changed, but now what I have the ability to do is to go ahead and take this value and change it to something like a red color, and notice what it outputs after that. You'll notice that nothing has happened here. But why? Why hasn't that changed that white color? Well, with a LERP, it always helps if we have an alpha plugged into that. Let's go ahead and take this node, and let's plug that into alpha. Now notice what's happened. We're now getting that color on those white values in our scene, or in our texture. So let's go ahead and take this value back to white. Okay, so that way we can get a true color again. So 111 across that. And what this is going to allow me to do is basically change that paint color. So I can now take this and I can plug that into my base color. And notice what we get on our output. Perfect. Now we want to do a little bit more to this. I want to be able to add some specular to that. So I want to be able to change the specularity of the paint. And then I also want to be able to give this a roughness by adding in a normal map. And so we're going to continue working on our material in the next lesson.